Welcome to the Behavioral Groups podcast. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We interview interesting people in order to unlock insights into behavioral science and how we can apply them to work and life.
Okay, Tim. So we typically talk about our sponsors here, but today, instead of sponsors, we're going to ask you, our listeners, to do something for us. We would love for you to forward this podcast on to just one of your friends, a friend that is cool and smart and that you think might find our witty banter and deep insight interesting.
I don't know if people have that many friends. Even one friend that would enjoy our witty banter. I don't know.
It's because we're so witty. And that's it. That's all our listeners need to do. Just forward this on or another Behavioral Groups episode to a smart friend and asking them to give it a listen, as they may say in Australia.
Good on you, mate.
There you go. You got your Australian accent going.
Oh, man, I'm going to get such bad mail on that. Sorry. Our
no,
apologies.
No, you won't. We don't get any mail. What are you talking about?
Okay, this leads us into our episode today with Bri Williams, who resides and works in Australia. I've known Bri for a number of years, met her after reading a blog post she wrote, and I thought, we are from the same tribe.
Australian?
No. No, behavioral science.
Oh, that tribe. I'm
tribe.
Sorry. I was going to say, I didn't know.
No, we actually met in the San Francisco airport a couple years later, and Bri established the first Australian consultancy specializing in the application of behavioral economics. She's been focusing on business and personal effectiveness since 2011 and has a broad range of clients. Her business is doing great. But she's also an author of multiple books on behavioral science, including Behavioral Economics for Business.
Her new one.
Yeah, the new one, which is very good. The How of Habits, and our personal favorite, The Little Book of Behavioral Economics.
The Little Book of Behavioral Economics. Again, yeah.
Yeah, that was not an Australian accent. But we had a good conversation with her about a number of topics that, as our regular listeners might suspect, kind of went all over the place.
Yes, we talked about her model of applying behavioral economics, a triangle approach of overcoming the three main barriers that she sees of apathy, paralysis, and anxiety, and how apathy relates to Danny Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 thinking, how paralysis is much like choice overload, and anxiety is focused on loss aversion.
Yeah, we also talked about priming with hotel passwords and toilet paper.
Toilet paper? Is this the, I'm trying to think. I think we've had other conversations about toilet paper on this podcast, have we? Or is this a first?
Lou Carbone introduced it to us, I think.
That's true.
But yeah, maybe we have.
Anyway.
Okay, toilet paper. We're going to talk about how subtle changes can make a big difference. And the conversation expanded on relaying some information about her work and creating websites, and actually some very interesting websites. And, Kurt, I know that you particularly enjoyed her music selection.
I did. And it was one of the bands that I've talked about on the show in the past. But you're going to have to listen to the podcast to find out more and which one.
Well, it was a fascinating conversation that we think you, our listeners, will enjoy. Again, if you haven't already paused this episode to share it, please do that right now. Share this with others. Write us a review. It really goes a long way in spreading the word about behavioral grooves. With that, please sit back and enjoy our captivating conversation with Bri Williams. Bri Williams, welcome to the Behavioral Grooves podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well. It's great to be with you both.
Good.
It's morning in Australia. It is evening here in Minnesota. So you're bright and chipper, and Tim and I are a little bit on the wee end of the day. So listeners, please understand the dichotomy that's going on.
But we're excited. We are really excited to have you. So we'd like to start with, before we get into some real questions, a little bit of a speed round. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Bicycle or unicycle?
Bicycle.
Live life without a mobile phone or life without a laptop?
Without mobile.
Okay. Name one of your guilty pleasures.
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
That's good.
All right. Travel. Do you like to travel with a set itinerary or no itinerary at all?
Itinerary.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Okay. Would you rather be the biggest behavioral economics consultancy in Australia or the 20th biggest behavioral economics consultancy in the world?
Neither.
That's a good one, and we'll add our speed round.
Well, okay. We have to dive in on that. Tell us about why that's neither.
Well, I have the philosophy. I started my business, PeoplePatterns, about 7 years ago, and it was really, I want the business to serve me rather than me serve the business. So I've seen too many small business owners becoming enslaved to the work, and that's really not what my interest is. And so in terms of scale, so if I was to become the biggest, it would swamp, I think, the intellectual development of what I'm doing. So perhaps if the question was, do I want to be the best behavioral consultancy in Australia? Absolutely. And why not? I already am. No, that's a little arrogant. That's a little arrogant. No, it's I'm just having some fun with it. But yeah, bigger for me doesn't equal success.
Okay, fair enough. So we met about 7 years ago, if I remember right. Is that fair, in the San Francisco airport?
I don't know that. Oh, it possibly was 7 years ago. Do you know how we first connected, Tim? It was a blog I wrote. Do you remember? It was called The Slapdown.
Yeah.
And you said you pinned it on your wall, and Dan Ariely liked it, and all this sort of thing. And so we connected via web a couple of times, and yeah, so began our friendship.
That's isn't that great? And we are absolutely of this cut from the same cloth, in that regard, which I think is really cool. But how long did it take you to develop your behavioral framework? I remember you got started. You came from accounting, right? And didn't you have like an accountancy background? And
yeah, like most people who end up doing what we do, it probably wasn't a straightforward path. So I did a double degree of psychology and accountancy, which was a very odd combination at the time and possibly still is. But and I didn't know how the points would fuse, but they have delightfully. So how did I get into behavioral economics, or how did I start my consultancy or my behavioral framework? Long path, but I did accountancy really as a starting point to get into business. I think finance skills are great fundamentals to underpin any sort of understanding of business. Psychology was always my natural interest in how people involve themselves in life. And so my first 5 years I was working in finance, and then I moved into human resources. I was with the Coca-Cola company, and then I moved into product management roles. The first being with Thomson Reuters in a publishing capacity for human resource books, and the last was for the Yellow Pages, White Pages brand in Australia. And so I was managing the phone directory, which was actually more interesting than it sounds, because in Australia, the phone directory was one of the only ones in the world to make money. Awesome. So it was about a $400 million business on its own. And whilst I was there, I was a little disenfranchised with how we were getting information about our customer base. And it was the Christmas of 2008, I think. My brother gave me a book that changed my life. And the book was Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely.
Of course it was. Yes.
And I thought, well, that's exactly what the fusion point that I've been looking for is, how people in business can get answers about their customers in a new way. Because in my role in a product management sense, we'd commission a lot of focus groups, we'd have a lot of survey data, and yet it wouldn't ever translate into real behavior in the marketplace. So there was a disconnect in what we were relying on for making decisions and what people were actually doing. And behavioral economics for me was the point that filled that void.
Yeah, and yet you're not a big fan of the part of behavioral economics that's really just a panoply of ideas and effects and heuristics and biases. That didn't appeal to you. or you didn't, well, you explained, but it didn't sound like that was functional for you.
It wasn't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So whilst I was still in my corporate role, I wanted to prove to myself that this field of behavioral economics that I've recently acquainted myself with could be applied to business, because the books, as great as they are, so Nudge and Predictably Irrational and the all of the extensions to those, are written for a generalist or from an academic perspective for multiple industries, but they're not really written for business practitioners. And so when I was still in the corporate sector, I wrote a book called 22 Minutes to a Better Business. And that was really 18 common business issues. And I would take what behavioral biases and heuristics could be applied to each of those scenarios. So customer retention, staff motivation, how you invoice and how you price your products. But it was really just a little, it was a very short 40-page booklet. People can download it for free off my website. And I called it 22 Minutes to a Better Business because at the time, 2.5 Men was very popular on television in Australia. You know, the Charlie Sheen sitcom?
Yes.
So my proposition, yes, everyone unfortunately remembers it. And I couldn't understand why it was so popular, but my proposition to my readers was stop watching, you know, a 22-minute sitcom and substitute it with a book where you'll actually read something. So it was 22 minutes to a better business without the ads. You know, content for a sitcom is 22 minutes. So, but that to me proved that there's a gap again in how businesses are going about it, because there was a connection point between all of these biases that are floating, all these principles, and how do we ground them into what we do on a day-to-day basis in business. And this is a long-winded way of saying, cut to the chase. I left the corporate sector because I could see that there was an opportunity for someone to do that translation between all of the science and what it means on a day-to-day business basis. And that's what my consultancy became. But as you were saying, Tim, having behavioral economics is useless unless you can wrap your arms around all of it and say, well, how is it going to change what I'm doing? And that led me to developing my own framework, because one of the challenges with behavioral economics as a area of science is that there is no, as we know, no codification. There is no unified framework. And that means for people in business, how can they use it? It becomes a laundry list of principles, but how do I write an email differently? How do I do my pricing differently? You know, there seemed to be another missing link, which was how does it help me change my life when I'm sitting down and doing something on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, so tell the listeners about your model.
The model really starts with a very basic statement around everything we do in business every day is about getting people from point A to point B. So point A is what people are currently doing, so what your customers are currently doing. Point B is what you would like them to do. Now, usually in my experience, people jump straight to point B. We know what we want our customers to do, and by customers, they can also be internal customers, our stakeholders. We know what we want people to do, but we forget to ask, what are they currently doing? And only by knowing what they're currently doing can you understand the magnitude of the change that's required. So the model starts with point A and point B. Sounds basic, but often it's skipped. From there, in order to get people from point A to point B, there are 3 points of resistance that we can anticipate. And this is the framework that I've developed around behavioral economics. So the first resistance that you're likely to encounter, I call it apathy. Okay. And this is based on system 1 and system 2. So apathy, what do I mean by that? We have lazy brains. We think very quickly. We think most of the time quite superficially. So if we're not engaging our customers, if they are apathetic, they can't be bothered, it's more effort than it's worth, they're not going to bother doing what we would like them to do. So apathy is the first barrier. The second is paralysis. That's paradox of choice. So this is where people might be interested in what you're suggesting, but they're getting overwhelmed by that decision. So our role there is really to clarify the choices, the options that we're presenting, and put them on a path to resolution. And the third barrier assuming now apathy is not a problem, so they're interested. Paralysis isn't a problem, so they know what they need to do. Is anxiety, and this is the principle of loss aversion. So why are they worried about proceeding? And now this can be as simple as, I'm not going to press that button on a website because I don't know where it leads, or I don't know what it does. And so that it also inhibits behavior. So apathy, paralysis, anxiety, those are the three barriers that prevent people from moving from point A to point B. Once you interrogate your behavioral challenge through those lenses, you can then use all of the other behavioral biases and heuristics to populate that, flesh it out, but also come up with solutions to get people to change their behavior.
So, go ahead, Kurt.
Oh, so when you're looking at that, at the process, how do you use that in your business? So are you going through and running kind of an analysis around how that current, the point A is and where they are, and the magnitude, and how that applies to apathy, paralysis, and anxiety? Is that kind of the way? So if the business is looking at that, so help us understand that a little bit.
Exactly. So a lot of the training work I do is teaching people about this model. So it's really getting them to pin down what is their behavioral objective. So what are they looking to do? Because often people rush to things like, oh, we need to educate people. Well, educating them might not change their behavior. So what is the underpinning behavioral objective? So that's the training piece. If I'm doing an analysis myself, yes, I start from exactly that point. There are a couple of questions that I ask before we get into the A to B. The first is, who am I trying to influence? And then the second is, in what context? So who am I influencing? What context? So what's happening around them? Where are they? Are there other people around them when we're trying to change their behavior? And then I go into an analysis of the situation. So you can use this model. It's beautiful because it can scale. So I can use it when I'm looking at a smaller issue, like I'm trying to get people to engage with a newsletter, for instance. So I could look at it that way, or a website. I've also been using it in larger scale issues, like how do you get whistleblowers to participate in a workplace? How do you get them to blow the whistle on divergent or unethical business practices? How do we get people, we call it superannuation, but 401k, how do we get people to contribute more or participate more in their retirement savings? So the model can really scale, and it can cut across any sort of industry and any sort of organization type, which I love, because it just gives me so much opportunity across different industry sectors, and the light globe goes off with so many people when they start to look at it through the prism of behavior change.
Yeah, well, and having a model helps us understand, right? And it's cool. I mean, you're drawing from really fundamental stuff. You're drawing from Kahneman and Tversky's work. I assume that the paralysis part, that paradox of choice, comes from Sheena Iyengar's work, and their work is just fundamental to the basic understanding. As you said, the books are great for this generalist approach to the academia, but not so much for the application. I want to ask you, what did you think of like David Halpern and Alan Sampson's models that came out of the UK Insights team, Mindscape and East? I'm not interested in. I don't want you to smack them with how bad they are. I'm a big fan of East, actually, but as a model. But I'm just wondering what you think about those. They came after your model, but what do you think of those?
You can smack them now. It's just,
you just want some controversy on this podcast. Yeah, look, I have my own, I guess it's an acronym or a mnemonic that way. I call it influences. So I have, each letter of influences stands for things like I means immediacy, for instance. N is for norms. So it seems to be quite a common thing to create memory aids like that. And that's probably the Mindspace, how Mindspace works. So East is getting a little bit further towards, I think, activation. Why I created my model, and just for listeners, my model is actually in the shape of a triangle. So the A is at the bottom left of the triangle, the B is at the bottom right of the triangle, and then you go through the 3 layers to give you just a sort of visual. And I chose the triangle because it means change. So it's the delta symbol of change.
Right, perfect.
But also it means that, I wanted to convey the fact that you've got to go up the apex of the triangle. You've got to go through the barriers before you can then go down the slippery slide, the ease of going down towards the other side of the triangle. So what I was trying to devise in my model was a sense that this is active, and it's also grounded in behavior change. So always bringing it back to what's my A, what's my B, and not losing sight of that objective, and having the model spring out of that objective, really. So I think as a framework goes, I think where I've found a lot of application for mine is that it's more active. So it's rather than a passive kind of sense of this is a laundry list, which like Mindspace, it's like this is a laundry list of which principles you can use. I've found it much more active, and it also helps people make decisions about what might be in play. So when I talk to clients, is apathy in play in this scenario, yes or no? Yeah. If apathy is not the issue, is paralysis the issue, yes or no? Is anxiety the issue? And they might find at different times in their project, different layers play out. Yeah. So often when we're trying to engage our marketplace, apathy is the big thing. So how do we get people interested in our offer? Once we've got them interested, say, for instance, on a homepage on a website, so apathy might be the big issue. But once we start to show them the product range that we have, paralysis might be the issue. And so you can start it's more active in that sort of way because it flows throughout the points at which you're trying to influence people's behavior. Because as you know, in order to get people from point A to point B, it's a series of micro changes that we're asking of people.
Absolutely. And this is all about individual. You're not looking at it from a sociological perspective. You're not interested so much in big groups. You're really this model is focused on individuals, right?
Actually, no. It can be used on individuals. So, for instance, if I was engaging a stakeholder internally, I could do this model for that individual. But no, I use this. That's the other reason it can scale. I can look at, for instance, how do I get Australians under 34 to contribute more to their retirement savings? Point A is they're not contributing. Point B is I want them to contribute. What do I know about this segment? How do I engage them? So overcome apathy, overcome paralysis. How do I overcome anxiety? So you can use it both on an individual scale and a segmented scale.
Well, and what I meant was that ultimately what you're influencing is each individual.
It's true. Yes.
Coming back to each individual. Yeah. When we were, in preparing for this, there's this. You're sort of like a all hands, anything that is available in the world of psychology, behavioral sciences, you can just grab it right in. There was a great a lot of references to primes in one recent article on where you gave the example of the Wi-Fi password. The password itself is book now and save.
Yeah.
Which is just it's just such a great prime. Is there anything that's off limits to you, or do you feel like like you're just going to just grab from whatever good ideas there are?
Oh, I think so, Tim. It's I'm a little bowerbird, and I think that's how you kind of need to be. I'm always looking for real life applications or insights into behavioral approaches. I write for Smart Company every week, so that forces me to really come up with ideas every week. It's quite a discipline, and that's why when I'm staying in a hotel and I find that they've sequenced their minibar list in a particular way, or they've talked about towels in a way that's curious. I bite on those sorts of things and they end up in a blog.
It might as well.
That's right.
Right. It might as well.
Well, and those bring insights. I look, Lou Carbone, who we saw speak at a recent conference, wrote Clued In, and much of his entire work is on the folding of toilet paper rolls in hotels, and the impact that makes on your perception of the hotel and various different things. And it's very
well, and the correlation between how fancy the fold is and how much you're paying for the room.
And if there's anybody for listeners, you can probably Google Lou Carbone, Clued In, and then you can see all these pictures. And some of the folding of toilet paper is well beyond anything that any normal person would ever think of doing. Not just your little nice triangular area that says, yes, we cleaned the bathroom, and look, we did this to, and you go, oh, great. They have swans.
That's impressive. I'll have to look that up, because I think one of the other struggles with behavioral economics is, it can seem very conceptual, it can seem very esoteric. And so to bring it back to everyday experiences, because I'm mainly talking with a business audience that are looking to apply it. So it's like, well, this is all around you. People are trying to influence you all the time. I have not looked at the toilet paper, but here we go. Here's another example.
They may not have it in Australia. I don't know. Yeah.
I might be the first. It does remind me of some research that I did write about on some, I think it was out of the States, but they were researching how people don't use good products. So in this time, for instance, they bought festive toilet paper into a gymnasium, and they counted the sheets that people were using, whether they used the festive toilet paper or they used the plain toilet paper. And they found that people were less likely to use more of the festive toilet paper. And the principle of, the research was people tend to save good products for later, or they don't, because they think there's been more effort involved in its creation. And so there you go. That's some more toilet paper research for you to throw into the mix.
I don't know if we've had so much toilet paper talk on the podcast before. This is a first for us. So, Bri, obviously you've done a lot of really interesting work with your clients. Is there an interesting project that you've done that you can share with the listeners that you thought might kind of bring to light some of the behavioral economic principles, or even just, some fun, insightful things that people might find amusing?
Oh, goodness. I don't know if we always think of them as fun. I always find them interesting because when I'm working with clients, I'm kind of the one that's outside of them. So I don't have the minutiae and the politicking that they probably have to go through. I've worked a lot in the private health insurance market, and I'm working with clients through that. I'm really, part of the work I do is behavioural coaching, which I enjoy, because after a training process, I then do 45-minute phone conversations with people, because what I've certainly noticed is you can excite people about behavioural economics, but it's then the translation into now I have to go back to my desk and work something through. So I enjoy that work. Other projects, I'm looking at my client list thinking, I've worked in one that I found interesting, because it's an industry I wouldn't normally have thought about, is pest control.
Okay.
For instance, so this organization.
There's got to be a story here. Why would a pest control company be interested in the application of behavioral economics?
Well, and I'm just making a big assumption here. I've been to Australia twice, and before I've gone down there, I always read about the deadliest animals in the world are all in Australia, and many of them are bugs. And so
no, we only tell people that so they stay away. That's all. But you obviously slipped in, Kurt. So
well, apparently you're not paying all that much attention.
The brown spider, whatever it is. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Why a pest control business? Often in small business, they come to me because they want their website to be more effective. So websites are really, and that's actually where a lot of my business started, because websites are a microcosm of behavioral influence. You're trying to get people to change their behavior, activating it through a website. And unfortunately, most websites that are created aren't created with psychology as the backdrop. So it became a very tangible way of me to describing how you can use behavioral economics, because you can see it and you can measure it. So why this pest control business were just wanting to their website to be more effective. And one of the issues they have is when people are purchasing a property, particularly in Australia, we have auctions, and they want people to commission like a pest inspection before they buy the house.
Wow.
But you might not get the house. So why pay $500 for a pest inspection on a house that you may not end up winning at auction? And so part of the challenge was about giving people a reason to get the pest control, and even if you don't, buy the house ultimately. So that very much was in the anxiety space of the model. So people weren't willing to spend money because they saw that as a loss without any sort of potential gain. So that was about how we could recreate the website to support that behavior.
And okay, so what did you do? What was the intervention that you created?
Well, we recreated the website. So we changed how we engaged people, and there were a whole lot of different techniques we applied. So from using social norms and credibility cues on the website to the value proposition that we created. I can't remember what it was yet, but it was about, so the proposition, because their business name was Surety Property. So I played on that to say, you want to be sure when you're buying a property, and so not leaving anything to doubt. So we used a lot of loss aversion through that exercise to overcome that.
Framing and
and did their business just boom after that?
Yes, it's done very well. They've been very happy with it, because it is it's a challenging one. People don't like spending money if they don't know it, and often any sort of insurance. So most of my clients are in grudge purchases space. So working with banks on getting people to switch banks, because no one can be bothered switching banks. Retirement savings, health insurance, buying pest control. All of these things, there's a lot of inertia. So the A is very fixed. People don't want to change their behavior. And so it's very much about trying to displace that. So most of the industries in Australia that seem to be more active in behavioural economics seem to be around those very inert grudge purchase spaces.
Yeah. So they're fighting apathy, a lot of them, right?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So Bri, I know you have done a lot of work on habits. You have books, talking about habits. If you had to give our listeners 3 hints about how they can improve or make their habits better, what would you do for 3 suggestions for our listeners?
Oh, well, they'll have to buy my book, Kurt, because I've forgotten off the top of my head. No, but why I wrote the book. So the book is The How of Habits. I was reading a lot on habits because after knowing what I know about behavioural economics, I was at a health retreat actually. And at the health retreat, it was great because you could watch everyone's behaviour unfurling during the course of the week, and they feel like they've never felt before, and life is good. And then they start to get really scared about, well, what happens when I leave the gates and I go back to my normal life? And so that then kicked off for me a real interest in habits. So how do you support this behaviour change ongoing? But one of my frustrations with the books are on habits and, willpower and all those sorts of things, again, whether they weren't practical, or they didn't support me. So part of the process that I've developed is taking people beyond knowing, for instance, what a reward, what your trigger is, what your routine is, and what your reward is, but really mapping that out into a plan that you can follow. So that's a long-winded way of saying why I wrote the book. My 3 tips, definitely make it easy. So one of the things that I do is always, so that I get up early in the morning and walk the dog, make sure that the clothes are right next to the bed so I don't have to rifle around in the cupboard in the dark to try and talk myself into it. So no, this is the work of BJ Fogg, really minimizing the efforts so that you don't have to have a great deal of motivation to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot to do around identity, and I've been very interested in I've forgotten the researchers, but those that said saying I don't versus I can't do something becomes very important. So I don't eat chocolate cake versus I can't eat chocolate cake. I can't puts you into a mode which is you're sacrificing and it's an unpleasant thing, whereas I don't is more an identity issue. I'm just not someone who eats chocolate cake. Now I'm experimenting at the moment with veganism, and so I've really noticed that my identity has really supported that. So identifying myself as a vegan has clarified a lot of my decision making, and I don't feel any sacrifice around what I'm not having because I've identified now as something else. So I think identity can be a big thing. The third tip, now, what should I say as a third tip? The third one, and I've just finished Gretchen Rubin's book on the 4 tendencies, which I'd resisted for a while because I thought, we don't need another model of splitting people, and it doesn't relate to any of the other big psychological structures, rightly or wrongly, like Myers-Briggs and those sorts of other dimensions. Anyway, I read it and I thought it was very good, because she does then help people sort of understand their tendencies in relation to habits. Why I bring that up is that, for instance, in my book to a degree, and often in the popular literature, it says you should share your goals with other people so that they'll hold you accountable. Now, that doesn't always work.
Right.
And so I guess my third tip is, for some people, sharing your goals might work, but don't think it will work necessarily for you.
Not the same bullet for everyone.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I've seen, aside from the literature, in my own experience, I've seen situations where in business where sharing goals is very positive and has a tremendous effect. And I've also seen situations where it really works against the efficacy of the goal itself. And so, so we have, I mean, that's going to be a mystery to unwrap. As far as I'm concerned, that's a problem that academia and researchers have not yet solved. Yeah. It's not just, and I don't think it's just environmental. I think that it has something to do with specific situations. I spent the last 3 years working on goal setting with George Lowenstein and Sarah Bhargava, and one of the things that we're trying to tease out is by gender, confidence and risk. And so how do men versus women view competence versus men and women viewing risk? And then how does that influence the setting and achievement of their goals? So that work hasn't been completed, but the big aha was, guess what? Men and women achieve goals at the same rate. However, they set goals at very different levels. Women tend to be significantly more conservative in the way that they set the goals, and yet that they're achieving at the same rates, of course, as men. So, okay, with that.
I was going to say that I think that's a really interesting space. And I think the one of the principles in behavioral economics that causes, I think, most issues is social norms, because, the blanket statement is that we are influenced by what other people do. How we are influenced and by whom and how our uniqueness and need for individuality is inflamed through social norms is a really interesting area. And I think by extension, goals, because goals aren't set usually in isolation to the social structures. Right. I think that's a really interesting area, Tim.
Yeah. We want to put you on the spot here now, Bri. We want to talk about music. So whether you like it or not, we'll stop rolling your eyes. But I know that you're a huge music fan. You go to concerts pretty much every night of the week.
in my mind, Tim. In my mind.
So for our listeners, who would Bri Williams recommend as a really great musician from Australia?
You have put me on the spot. I don't go to concerts, Tim. I'll clarify that. I think the last concert I went to was In Excess, would you believe? And that was just when In Excess was starting, let alone.
And yeah, you were like, what, 12 years old?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I will say I've just I have now a Spotify subscription, so my music habits have changed because I have it on all the time, but I have music that doesn't interfere with my work too much. And I think music can really set a mood. And so I think, it's priming. It really does prime our mood, and it really helps in that. So one of my favorites, some hippie Australians are Angus and Julia Stone.
Yes.
Honestly, one of Kurt's favorite
Yes.
bands. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
In concert when they came to Minneapolis, probably within 6 months ago or so. So by far one of, I think, the musicians and just the storytelling. Yeah, they're fantastic. So
okay. But was there someone else that you wanted to refer to?
Oh, it's a little bit random. I was in the city a couple of years ago. I was walking down one of the malls, and there was a busker called Santos Bocelli, and he is a classical guitarist. And I picked up his CD, but I don't think you'd find him, on any sharing apps. But it's one of those serendipitous finds that you hear music that you love, and it's one of my absolute favorites.
And his name again is?
It's Santos, and I'll not get his name right, so I might have to let you know, but it's Bocelli or something like that.
Okay.
B-O-C-C, yeah.
We'll make sure we get that from you and put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'd like to have that in the show notes. So
right.
Bri, it is always a pleasure to talk with you. It's good seeing you in this case, and thank you for joining us on the Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Keep grooving.
We will.
Thank you. Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavioral Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into my hairless head, and Tim, your fine mane of hair head.
Dude, don't look too closely. That's all I'm saying.
Relative to me, it is I don't know, some lion goddess of hair. That didn't make any sense.
Someone recently asked, I think it was of you, if you were the deep baritone voice on the podcast. And I don't know, how did you respond to that?
I said, no, I'm the tinny high-voiced on the podcast. And I go, Tim is our radio guy. He's the musician. He has that nice resounding voice. I have the tinny nasally thing going on. So,
oh man, I'm even after all these years of recording, I still have a hard time listening to my own voice.
I know.
I mean, I'm used to it, but that doesn't mean I like it. Okay,
all right.
We're grooving here.
All right,
Kurt, do you want to start? Do you want to talk about something that impacted you from our conversation with
Yeah,
Bri?
so I want to talk a little bit about her model, about removing those barriers and the three barriers that she sees, the component of apathy, paralysis, and anxiety. So
me too. So that's good. That's a great start.
All right. So I think from that perspective, as I'm looking at that, I think there's some really interesting components to that, and it relates to some of an interview we did with another person, Sarita Parikh, who talks about glide, which is removing some of these barriers. And so it's an interesting model. It goes back into Kurt Lewin's component of change and how change happens, about removing again barriers to change as it's going on. That in of itself, I think, is a key concept, and it's a concept that we often overlook. We think about nudges and how do we motivate people to move to that next thing, and how do we get people to do something by giving them an extrinsic reward or providing a challenge for them or other things to pull them. When in fact, I think a lot of our work, and particularly the application of this type of work, is really about removing some of those barriers that get in our way. And I thought that was a really insightful component.
Yeah. Two other things struck me about her model. One is it wasn't a critical comment that she made about behavioral economics or any of the literature that's been created, aside from the fact that they're all largely theoretical, or as one of our colleagues has said, it's sometimes it's sort of a stump the chump kind of a thing, right? I mean, they're really cute and clever and they're memorable, but what do you do with it? And Bri's model is very much focused on action.
Yeah.
It's very much focused on what do you do with this? And she quickly corresponds that triangular model to the habit loop, which was certainly influenced by B.J. Fogg. I know she's been a big fan of B.J. Fogg's work in years past, and that habit loop is a great way of taking the very actionable stuff that's coming out of that model, clearing the path for behavior change, and then actually putting it into practice.
Yeah, I like the component where, again, it's not just behavioral economics isn't just a list of heuristics and biases. Right? It becomes trying to put it in some semblance of an order or a model, and really bringing that to light about how do we apply these insights? How do we actually take these insights into work and life, which is what we try to do, and make them so that you can actually have a positive impact on what you are trying to achieve, making change in your life or achieving goals, whatever that would be.
She's also a complete opportunist when it comes to looking for opportunities for behavioral intervention.
Okay, that sounds almost.
She's writing a piece every week.
Yes.
For Smart Company.
Okay,
and that forces her into a mode of keeping her eyes open. And so when we got to talking about toilet paper, it's like she's paying attention to all this stuff. The passwords in the hotels, all the tiny little subtleties that are at play influencing us every day.
So I would consider that being more of an observer, a
okay.
Really good observer as opposed to an opportunist. But yes,
apologies to Bri.
I agree about that. I think there is a component about that because she's been focused on this for so long and needs to write that article weekly, that her brain is now just set to look for those types of. She's primed.
She is. Well, she's highly attuned to it, and I think that does a great service to her clients and to our sort of our community to have people. We have to be observing. We need to be on the lookout for opportunities to make changes.
So how can we? How can our listeners? How can you and I? How can we become better observers? What are some of the things that we could do to become better observers of the behavioral biases, heuristics, our own little quirks on how we do things? What can we do?
It starts with paying attention. It starts with thinking objectively about anything that we're doing.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah.
I spaced off there.
Kurt, come back.
It starts with paying attention.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Help me understand. So how do we do that? So that's a great thing, but how does one start to pay attention more? I mean,
I had a conversation with someone last night about this, and we talked about it. We use heuristics in our decision making to ease the cognitive load on our brains,
right?
Which is important because our brains aren't really suited for handling a tremendous amount of system 2 processing. It's too hard. However, there are certain times in our lives when it's good to stop and actually do a little system 2 processing.
Okay.
There are times when I'm getting in the car and getting ready to drive, and I stop to think, I go, okay, what am I doing? Am I really paying attention to everything that's going to happen in the car? And just for that period of time that I'm in the car, I try to really focus and try to be aware on a cognitive level of what's going on. What are the things that are around me? Not just to be a good driver, but what's actually happening? What is my brain processing? What am I thinking about?
How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? And then what are the decisions that I'm making so that as I'm driving along, I'm not just cursing at the asshole to my right that I'm trying to get off, an exit ramp, and he's blocking me, and so I'm yelling and screaming. But what is the situation that got me to that point? What is it why am I in the middle lane when I need to be in the lane getting ready to exit?
So it sounds to be a little bit like mindfulness and practicing mindfulness as you're going through your day-to-day component.
Yeah.
But we get caught in the routines and the habits and the ease of system one thinking, like we said, right?
And we need it.
We do need that. But so how do we jumpstart ourselves so that we aren't in that perpetually, so that we actually can stop and think about what we're doing and really pay attention to those things? Is it, we had talked with Caroline Webb, and she talks about the when-then kind of component, right? Or an if-then kind of situation. Is it something like that? So every time you now get in the driver's seat, that you consciously, so when I get behind the driver's wheel, I will consciously think about what I'm doing? Is it things like those? Are those elements? Or what else?
As a behavioral nudge, that the trigger is getting in the car and putting our hands on the wheel.
Okay.
And then at that moment, we automatically, we don't automatically, but we cue ourselves, we trigger ourselves to go, okay, where am I? What am I doing? I'm going to be mindful while I'm driving. Or when my wife walks in the door.
Right.
You know, she's been at work all day. Things have been going on in her life, and as opposed to sort of a perfunctory, "Hey, how was work?" Actually, pay attention, be mindful for a moment. Actually, look at her. How, what's going on, and have a potentially meaningful conversation. Maybe not, but at least be open to having that meaningful conversation because of paying attention to the words and the disposition and the all that stuff that goes along with it.
So again, it's coming back to finding those triggers to help us make sure that we are putting the attention on whatever the situation is. It can be behind the wheel. It can be when your spouse comes through the door. It can be when you are working on something at work that really needs to have maybe a little bit more concentration. But Bri is doing this on a daily basis of just finding these things and being observant of, I loved the component of her, that the password for the hotel, that, and noticing that and understanding that. And so does that come just because she has been immersed in this and it becomes kind of second nature to be looking at things in that? Is that part of this? Is it really just getting that next layer of insight?
That's a good question, and I think that's a topic for another grooving session.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about that? I've been blabbering.
No, on the part where I think the being immersed in things, I think that does lend itself. It's that component of, I don't know if it's the 10,000 hours thing that, was written about by Gladwell and all of that. But I think there comes a time where it's so immediately available in your brain because you have had such a exposure to these things that your brain can then, and instead of processing that, it can be looking at these other aspects. And it's not making much sense here. But I think there is some component, and I don't have empirical research to back this up. It's just it's a gut feel where I think that there is something to be said about becoming an expert in a field, and that then opening up the wider viewpoint of what you can see and what actually gets into your filters or through your filters into making those connections.
As opposed to a common bias of becoming an expert in a field and then narrowing, because the opposite can happen, right? Because you can say, well, I'm an expert in this, and everything that you're talking about, I already know that that's not right. And I can't remember the name of that bias right now. Maybe it's just the
forgetting bias,
the expertise bias. But that's right. It's coming into a greater knowledge and then being willing to acknowledge that there's a lot more.
Right, and it's being able. I think even with that, small, very focused knowledge in that arena, that opens up being able to see things. It's almost it's to a degree, it's that old adage of, if I have a hammer, then everything becomes a nail.
Yeah.
And you can look at it almost in that, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. There's a bad thing that everything becomes a nail, and everything isn't a nail, but it also allows you to see nails that you might not have otherwise noticed.
Well, there's that. That's exactly right.
So that's it. So
I want to ask you a musical question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I know. This is completely unscripted.
Yeah, well, it actually is. I should have known it was coming.
So, what music have you listened to in the last 24 hours that was just really nice for you? It was just like, yeah, that was a good track.
The last 24 hours, I have to. You're putting me on the spot.
Because you listen to music virtually every day.
Well, right? I listen to music virtually every night.
Every
right?
night, yeah.
Because I use it as part of my sleep component, sleep process. I had it on my Pandora, my Damien Rice channel.
Oh, good. Yeah, okay.
And so remembering a specific song, I can't say, but the Damien Rice channel is that more of the acoustic flavor of.
He's an incredibly talented songwriter.
Oh my gosh,
guitar player.
He is great.
Singer.
Yeah. So
I got turned on to a new artist just yesterday afternoon. A woman by the name of Pauline Herr, Herr.
Okay.
Pauline is out on the West Coast of the U.S. and it's mostly EDM. It's electronic. Dance music, for the most part.
EDM, that's a technical term for electronic dance music.
Yeah, okay. EDM, yes. So, but she recorded a track with Tasca Black that is really, really fine, and I just want to. I'll put a link in it, but she has a great sense of melody and rhythm, and she's an emerging artist, and I just want to call people's attention to it.
So, I want to ask you a question about music. So.
We didn't talk about this.
I know we didn't talk about this. This is how we roll. Do you use music to prime certain emotions? If you feel like you need to be hyped, do you have a certain go-to music for that? If you want to feel like you have to focus, is there a certain go-to music for that?
And that's an interesting question, Kurt, because of course, I'm familiar with it. I'm abundantly familiar with it. I have many people in my life who are happy to talk about how they like to play "We Are the Champions" before they go into a meeting and that sort of thing. And it's an effective prime. When I've been involved in it, it has absolutely worked. I don't process music that way, though. I don't typically process music that way. For me, those songs, the songs that come are actually responsive to what's going on in my life. So I'm getting "We Are the Champions" after. That's what's playing in my head. And by the way, I have a soundtrack in my head almost 24 hours a day. It may sound crazy, but I am listening to music almost constantly.
Yeah.
In my head.
In your head.
In my head.
Not through headphones or on the radio, but just in the background of your head.
My brain is processing music a lot throughout the day.
So when I'm talking to you, you have this musical background to the words that I'm saying?
Did you say something? Yeah.
Or are you just listening to a soundtrack that is actually more interesting than what I'm saying to you?
It's just there. And so when I leave the meeting that was really good, the presentation, that's when "We Are the Champions" starts playing for me.
Interesting.
It's not I know the experience, and I've been a part of it when other people have said, "Okay, we're going to listen to "We Are the Champions" before we do." Yeah, it's effective. My MO is the way my head works is that those songs play in a responsive way as opposed to a prospective way.
Interesting. Well, I think with that, we can wrap this episode
I think we
up.
should. Yes.
But again, thank you, listeners, for listening in. As always, if you liked this, leave a nice rating on your pod service, whichever one you use, and share with a friend, please. Thank you.
Thank you.